were afraid to tell the truth. The truth is too, this phrase that Foster used, too ghastly to contemplate. The change that happened with the ANC leadership in 2007 was real change. It put in place in the leadership of the ANC people who were not ANC, were afraid to tell that truth. You have this ANC led by people who are wearing ANC t-shirts, but they are not ANC. The way it happened was because there was a very, very systematic program on the part of the apartheid regime in its own defense to infiltrate the ANC and the rest of the liberation movement. Very, very heavy infiltration. Yeah. As the ANC, we had all of the machineries, let's check everybody who's joining and that. That was done. And some people were found and said, no, you can't belong among us. But there are many people who missed out. And some of them became part of the national leadership with the ANC in 2007. I'm talking about agents of the old regime. We're afraid to tell that truth.
You must have watched the video of Thabo Mbeki speaking on the African Renaissance podcast. In it, Mbeki lifts the veil on a subject that most of us tiptoe around in polite conversation, the uncomfortable truth that the African National Congress, the very movement that carried South Africa from the shackles of apartheid to the promise of democracy, may never have been entirely free of influence from those it sought to overthrow. Mbeki's words, "We are afraid to tell the truth," are more than a passing remark, they are a challenge to South Africans and to the ANC itself. They force a reflection on history, politics, and the lingering shadows that still shape the corridors of power in Pretoria. The first point to understand is the historical backdrop. During the years of struggle, the apartheid regime was not idle. It sought to infiltrate the liberation movements, and in particular the ANC, with spies, informants, and opportunists. This is not speculation. ANC documents themselves acknowledge that agents of the apartheid state had found their way into the ranks of the party and other democratic movements. The goal was simple: to destabilize, mislead, and dilute the resolve of those fighting for freedom. What Mbeki highlights is the lingering impact of these incursions. The effects, he warns, have persisted beyond the end of apartheid, quietly shaping the internal dynamics of the party, influencing decisions, and in some cases, guiding policy in directions that might not align with the original liberation ideals. Mbeki's warning forces us to ask, what does it mean for a movement to carry the structural legacies of a regime it opposed? On the surface, the ANC achieved what seemed impossible, the transition to a democratic South Africa. Yet the question remains whether the structures within the party, its networks, hierarchies, and even some of its personnel, retain traits, attitudes, or loyalties that belong to an older, more oppressive order. It is not just about naming names or exposing old spies. It is about acknowledging the subtle, persistent influences that shape governance today. When a party fears to confront such truths, it risks compromising its moral authority. What makes this topic even more compelling, and perhaps a little ironic, is the tension between public perception and internal reality. To the outside world, the ANC represents liberation, moral victory, and a hard-won democracy. Within, however, there may be unresolved tensions, legacies of infiltration, and the uncomfortable presence of individuals whose past allegiances are at best ambiguous. Mbeki's observation, delivered with a calm but firm clarity, is a reminder that moral victory in history does not automatically translate into moral clarity in governance. It is also worth considering what Mbeki implies about courage and fear. When he says we are afraid to tell the truth, he speaks of a fear that is both political and psychological. Naming infiltrators or acknowledging compromises is not just risky, it is destabilizing. It challenges the narrative that the party has been unbroken, unwavering, and entirely pure in its struggle. It challenges the public to reconcile pride in a liberation movement with the reality of its imperfections. Political stability is one thing, Mbeki suggests, but integrity and truth are another. From a practical perspective, the effects of these legacies are visible in South African politics today. Questions about internal accountability, corruption, and policy inconsistency are often framed as contemporary failings. Yet they may also reflect deeper historical patterns that trace back to the strategies of infiltration and opportunism Mbeki speaks of. A liberation movement is only as strong as its willingness to interrogate its own history, and the ANC's hesitation to fully confront this past may hinder its capacity for renewal. There is also a human element in all of this. We often think of politics as a matter of abstract ideas and institutional design. But Mbeki's words remind us that it is also about people who carry experiences, loyalties, and compromises. Infiltration is not merely about the insertion of agents, it is about influence over minds, attitudes, and behaviors. The true challenge is not just structural but moral. Can the ANC retain the vision of equality and justice while acknowledging the imperfections embedded within its ranks? Now, to make this a little lighter for a moment, imagine the ANC as a grand old house. During apartheid, intruders crept in through the cracks, hiding in attics and behind cupboards. Decades later, the house looks splendid from the outside. The paint is fresh, the doors swing easily, and the garden is flourishing. Yet, behind the walls, some of those intruders, or at least their handiwork, still linger. Mbeki is reminding us to check the cupboards, to be honest about what we might find, and to reckon with it rather than sweep it under the rug. It is uncomfortable, yes, but necessary for the house to be genuinely secure and hospitable. Mbeki's statements also open the floor to a broader discussion about liberation movements worldwide. How do movements that succeed in overthrowing oppressive regimes ensure that their own structures are not compromised? History is full of examples where victorious parties became captive to their own fears or the ghosts of their past. The South African case is compelling because it is both an achievement and a cautionary tale. Democracy was won, but the war against compromise, infiltration, and the erosion of ideals is ongoing. For viewers following South African politics, Mbeki's reflection is both a warning and an invitation. It warns that ignoring uncomfortable truths can erode public trust, diminish accountability, and weaken the moral compass of governance. At the same time, it invites us to engage, to question, and to hold leaders accountable not just for their promises but for the legacies they inherit and perpetuate. It is an appeal to political literacy and civic responsibility. In closing, this discussion is not merely historical. It matters today because the questions Mbeki raises touch on the very fabric of South African democracy. Are leaders acting purely in the spirit of liberation, or are they constrained, consciously or unconsciously, by the remnants of a past they never fully confront? Can South Africa's political institutions continue to serve the people faithfully if the party at the center of power fears to speak its own truths? If you found this analysis thought-provoking, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments below. Share your thoughts on whether the ANC has fully overcome the legacies Mbeki describes, or whether the infiltration of the past still shapes our present in ways we barely acknowledge. Politics is never simple, but conversation is the first step toward clarity. See you next time.